Hello and welcome to my TED Talk. My name is John McBride. I'm a teacher at the Metropolitan School, and my story is called From Emergency Room to Finish Line. Now, I've had two constants in my life, education and sport. Since I was a baby, I guess, and I started learning things. I went through school, my schooling years, and then I became a teacher, and I've never left education. That whole time, I've always been someone who's very sporty. I'm not an amazing athlete. I haven't made top teams, but I've always participated in a range of different sports. I run, I work out, I surf, I snowboard, I play tennis, whatever. I really like to play sports. And these two things kind of coincide in the middle of this story. So I was in my postgraduate year of university, which means I had finished my degree. I could have gone out and became a teacher, but myself and about 20 of the other people that were in my course decided to go back to university for one more year of research-based study. And halfway through this year, when we finished our first semester, we decided that we were going to go out for a dinner together because we were halfway to the finish line. So we went out for a Chinese meal, and it was like a nice celebration. Most of the class came, and after we finished our meal, we said, let's go into a bar for a drink. So before Uber was around, you had to go out onto the street and wave down a taxi, and that's what we were doing. But for whatever reason, there were no taxis stopping on our side of the road. There were lots stopping on the other side of the road. And where we were, there was no pedestrian crossing or street lights to cross. But I decided I was going to cross the road when the cars were clear, so I could go over and get a taxi for us from that side of the road. And I did something called jaywalking, which is actually illegal in many countries. I'll explain what it is. But basically, if somebody was to blame for this situation that I'm going to explain, it would have been me because I was jaywalking. Luckily, no one was to blame. There was no need. But yeah, it would have been my fault if it had come to it. So it's not a sob story. What I did, all of the cars from my right, I was on a two-lane road like the one in the picture. There were cars coming from my right and from my left. I waited till there was no more cars coming from my right, and I walked to the middle of the road and stood on the white lines there. And then I waited for the cars coming from my left so I could cross over to the other side and get that taxi. That's jaywalking, standing in the middle of the road. Now, this is my first link to Limitless. Although most of the stories today are going to talk about how you can break through your limits and don't let people put limits on top of you, there's a couple that you do need to abide by, and those, in this case, are your physical limits. I was a human on a road. I should have been safer about what I was doing. A car versus a human is a very unfair fight. So that physical limit is something I should have paid more attention to. Now, I'm standing in the middle of the road. There were no cars coming from the right, so I moved to the middle of the road, right? There's three cars coming from the left. The first one goes by, the second one goes by. After that third one, I'm going to cross the road to get the taxi. In the third car, there's a pizza delivery boy who's driving home from work. He's a 16-year-old. He's on his restricted license, which means he has to be home by 10 p.m. because he can't drive after that. So he's finished delivering pizzas. He's driving home. What he sees in front of him as he's driving along the road is not me, because I'm caught in the headlights of the cars that are now coming from the right behind me. So I'm in the middle of the road. There now are cars coming from behind me, and there's one more car in front of me. But because those oncoming cars are shining their headlights right to where I am and then into the eyes of the pizza boy, I get lost in the headlights. So I'm effectively invisible to him. What he does see is that on the other side of the road, there's a group of people that are about to do the same thing that I'm doing. They're waiting for him to go past so they can walk to the middle of the road and they can get to where I came from. Now, to be super conscious and a super careful driver, he decides that he's going to do a slight swerve around that group of people that are coming from the side of the road. Like, if he went straight, no problem. He wouldn't have hit them or me. But to be super careful, he does a little swerve. Extra careful. Now, that little swerve is enough to make a connection with me with his car. So I'm standing in the middle of that road where he can't see me, and my feet aren't square. My right leg or right foot is slightly in front of my left foot. So my leg is that much further out than just comfortably standing, but my right leg's slightly out. That little swerve that he did to be careful of the people on the left was enough to put the front corner of his car into my right leg that's this much stepped in front of my left leg. And from this moment onwards, I have to tell the story from what other people have told me because I have zero memory because I get completely knocked out. So the connection happens, and apparently I go flying through the air. I imagine maybe like 5 to 10 meters in the direction that his car was going. I'm apparently also somersault around, and I imagine it was probably just a 180-degree kind of flip. As I flip and fly through the air, I come down and I face plant, and I'm not sure if I landed first on my face or the back of my head, but whichever one landed first, I then bounced, and the other side smashed into the concrete. So I end up lying on the floor with blood pouring out of my face and blood pouring out of the back of my head. And that front right leg that took the connection from the car twisted at a really unnatural angle. Now remember my class of mostly girls who are all back on the other side of the road. Apparently they all come screaming and running into the middle of the road because they think they've just seen one of their classmates and one of their friends die in front of their eyes. So, and my cousin's also in the class. I've got a cousin who was in the class with me. So they're there screaming, crying, running to my possible dead body. One of my best friends was also out with us that night. He doesn't scream or cry. He grabs his cell phone, keeps his cool, and goes boom, 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 ambulance to this location. Someone's just been hit by a car. Now, the next thing I'm going to explain is there's something called divine intervention that the ancient Greeks believed in. Like when one of their warriors couldn't be touched by any enemy, they would say the gods were looking after him. He had divine intervention. I think I had a little bit of divine intervention on this evening. And I'm not sure if it was some form of gods looking after me or good karma coming back to me. But as I flew through the sky and landed on my face, all of the cars screeched to a massive halt. The first car coming from one direction was a police officer, and the first car coming from the other direction was a doctor. Both of them off duty, not working at that moment. So they got out of their cars, and the doctor started looking after me, and the police officer started controlling the situation, the area. So I was immediately in really good hands. Eventually the ambulance came, and still I'm asleep, I don't remember any of this. The ambulance came, and those ambulance people put me into a stretcher and into the ambulance and drove me to the hospital. My cousin was allowed to go in the ambulance with me, so she's there and she told me parts of the story that I'm still telling now. Apparently, somewhere along the drive, I woke up, but I was in shock. So I guess my brain wasn't letting itself realize how bad the injuries were, something like that, because I woke up and I was convinced that I was fine and that I didn't need to go to the hospital and that they should just let me out of the ambulance right now. And probably being a really annoying patient for them. I didn't realize how bad I was. I didn't know that my face was completely smashed and destroyed, or that at this point my leg was in really grave danger. So apparently, yeah, I spent a lot of time telling them that I was fine, and they were trying to look after me and put like fluids into my body and like strap me down to the stretcher, and I was apparently just being very annoying. They got me to the emergency room, and throughout this time, my mum and dad had been called, and they had gone there as well. And still in shock, I'm in the emergency room, strapped to a bed, and I'm surrounded by doctors. And now there's this moment of clarity where my brain, I guess, becomes more conscious, and I snap out of the shock. And what I see from lying down on the bed is that I'm completely surrounded by doctors and nurses. I see my dad's face on one side, and he's looking pretty distraught, like he might be about to lose his only son. And my mum's face on the other side, and she's got a similar look to her face, except she's covered with tears, crying. And in this like moment of conscious and coming out of shock, I just say, "Mum, what's going on? Where am I? What's happening?" And she tells me that I'm in hospital, I've been hit by a car, and I just need to calm down, listen to the doctors and do what they say. So I take a moment to mentally process that, and I also like mentally process my body. And the doctors are all really concerned about my neck. They think that I could have broken my neck as I've come down and landed on the concrete on my face. And that would have been the most dangerous thing and the first thing they needed to spend their attention on. So a lot of the doctors, I've got this big thing around my neck, a lot of the doctors are focusing on that. And as I'm working out my body and realizing what I can feel, I realize that I can't feel my right leg at all. I can't move it, I can't feel it, I don't even know that it's there. And I start freaking out. And I start yelling, well, not yelling to my mum, but saying to my mum, "Mum, tell them my neck's okay. It's my leg. Tell them to look at my leg," because I was really worried they were going to amputate my leg. So I'm freaking out, saying all of this kind of stuff. "Tell them to look at my leg," and they're just like, "Put this guy to sleep so we can actually work on him." And then they did what they had to do, and I wake up the next morning in the hospital. And apparently I was allowed to leave the hospital that day. I had to wait for swelling to come down before I could go for an MRI scan and they could actually see what the real injuries were. My face was smashed up. I was covered with cuts and scars and things, but the details of the injury of my leg, they weren't sure about. I had a big brace on it. And my dad was telling me this, so we were meant to leave, but I was in excruciating pain anytime I tried to move my leg. I couldn't move it by myself. I had to like pick up my leg and reposition myself. And I tried to put it on the floor as if I was going to walk, but there was no way I could put my weight on the leg at all. So a doctor came back, and now that I was up and talking and being out of shock and normal, they were like, okay, we need to send you for the MRI scan right now, which I went for, and we found out what the actual injuries were. So the superficial stuff on my face, I must have landed on my chin here, and I've got a big scar. And at one point, you could have put your finger through a hole in my chin here, and it would have come out on the inside of my mouth because there was stitches all on the outside of my face and on the inside of my lips as well. All of those teeth were smashed up in the impact, just a little bit, just a millimeter or so. The back of my head is covered with scars, so now when I shave the back of my head, you can see scars from where I bounced. And I had like scratches and bruises and stuff, but nothing major. However, my leg was the big one. So that's an image of your knee, and there's 4 ligaments inside your knee. The PCL and the ACL, the ones that are on the bottom of the screen, they cross over at the front, and quite often sports players will do those. And if a sports player does their ACL, then they're basically out for the season. They go and have surgery, and they might be able to come back and play 12 months later. The lateral is on the outside of your knee, and it's hardly ever damaged because the other knee generally protects it from being bumped on the inside of your knee. However, my inside of my knee was where it took the bump. And the medial, that one will heal itself. Sports players will also do that one, and it will heal itself after like 6 weeks of rest. My medial was fine. The other 3 were destroyed completely. And the doctors told me that this was one of the worst knee injuries they'd ever seen, and they didn't know what was going to happen after the surgery, and there was a good chance that I wouldn't be able to play sports again, which is a really tough pill for me to be trying to swallow. They were going to need to cut pieces of my hamstring, another muscle, to replace the ligaments that have been destroyed. So I went for a surgery. They did all of that. I've got big scars on the side of my knee where they had to cut out the hamstring, and little scars on the front where they had to do keyhole surgery. And then I had to go into recovery for a very long time. This was the toughest part because after having the accident and then having the surgery, it probably was like an 18-month kind of recovery. Initially, the first 3 months, I couldn't walk at all. I had to have crutches or a wheelchair, and that was really tough. I had to move out of the flat where I was living with my friends and go back to living at home so that I could kind of be looked after a little bit by my parents. I was still going to university, although I had to cancel a whole lot of assignments and things. But I was spending my time in the library going up and down staircases on crutches. So I got really strong arms, but my leg took a really long time to recover. The initial exercises were like, okay, John, can you wiggle your toes? Great, do that for 20 minutes. And then eventually moving to the point where I would try and lift my leg like this by myself, but that was like months later, or like this by myself. After months of these little exercises all day, every day with physiotherapy. Probably around 12 months later, maybe 6, I can't remember exactly, I was able to start trying to run. Oh, sorry, rewind. After 3 months, I could get rid of the crutches. And being able to walk after not being able to walk by yourself for so long is a really proud feeling. So walking without crutches, that was a really great phase of the recovery. And then maybe another 6 months later, I was finally able to run, and then finally able to put some weight and do weights to grow back the muscles that were deteriorated after not using it. So it was a really long time of 2 things really, of hard work and optimism, which are 2 things I always try and live my life by anyway. And these are this is the wrapping up the main point of my talk, and where it links to Limitless. I guess the doctors were putting on these limits of you may never play sport again. Or they were saying well, you might be able to go cycling and go swimming, but there's a chance you may never be able to properly run again. And in that moment, because I've loved being a sportsman and running is so key to that, I made this little kind of pact in my head that I'm definitely am going to run again actually, so I don't care what you say. And in fact, I'm going to run a full marathon. So I added to my bucket list that I'm going to run a full marathon after the recovery of that accident. So yeah, hard work and optimism. got me to the point where I could tick that off my bucket list eventually. And a few years later, I did run a full marathon. I googled the average time this week, and it's about 4 hours for someone my age. So I ran it, I was aiming for under 3.5. So I was really stoked with that. And you can see a couple other photos there of climbing mountains or going snowboarding. So I did get to a full recovery, but it was definitely due to those two things. And those two things are my final link to being limitless or breaking through limits. If you are, I don't know, trying to make a sports team or train for a full marathon or apply for university or apply for a job, I think if you work hard at whatever it is, even if you're just trying to ask a girl out on a date, if you work hard at whatever it is and you're an optimist about it and you believe that you can do it, and then you work hard enough to make sure you can give yourself the very best chance, you're more than halfway there. So those are my two main kind of things that I would say. Keep those in mind if you're trying to break through some kind of limit of your own. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day.